Again, welcome everyone to this year's Flash Talk event. I want to begin by thanking the Spencer Foundation and the CPEVC Resource Funds for supporting us, providing research support to promote assets-based learning by children and students from underserved backgrounds. The funding has provided 1/4 GSRs to support graduate research activities, and about 70% of the funding has gone to students who themselves are from underserved backgrounds, and we're very grateful for the support. Today, a group of 11 graduate and postdoc fellows will each give a 1 to 2 minute talk about their research related to NGL missions. And for some presenters, this talk may not be related to their own dissertation study. And we will invite one question after each talk. And these talks are organized into 3 clusters. I will be moderating the first cluster, and Barbara will be moderating the second cluster, and Cynthia, third cluster. And at the end of each cluster, if there's more time, we will invite more questions. And at the very end of the event, there will be time for general discussion and questions for anyone. All right, so let's get started. Our first presenter is Sam Bash. Sam is from the Department of Psychology, and her research, her dissertation research focuses on young children's cognitive development in diverse everyday contexts. And her talk today will be on a different topic. So go ahead, Sam.
Okay. In spring 2020, when UCSC first went into emergency remote instruction, our team interviewed senior students, the majority of whom identified as first-generation, low-income and/or students of color, to understand their lived experiences with pandemic-era remote instruction. The students described challenges they faced accessing educational opportunities during the pandemic. They also discussed how they collaborated with families, peers, and instructors to expand their learning. One challenge students faced was a decrease in access to physical and psychological learning space as they suddenly found themselves doing their schoolwork from home. For example, one student, Miguel, described how his little niece and nephew often interrupted his online classes. Other students described how home and school meshed together. Although students faced limited access to learning space, they also experienced support from family in negotiations around communal space in the home. For example, Miguel shared that as remote learning continued, his little niece and nephew came to understand when it was homework time for their uncle. For Miguel, even the youngest members of his family collaborated to support his learning. Multiple students identified this kind of family collaboration as an asset for their education. Listening to the lived experiences of students like Miguel highlighted several implications for teaching. For example, instructors should honor the strengths of students' families and invite those strengths into the classroom. Instructors should also work to balance flexibility with accountability in order to challenge students academically while honoring their other commitments, including their commitments to family. Overall, our findings highlight that institutions can broaden students' access by building on the strengths students bring to their learning through collaborating with peers, families, and instructors. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Adrienne Ricker. Adrienne is from Earth and Planetary Science, and her dissertation focuses on the ecology of modern and fossil frogs and lizards. The flash talk she's going to give to us concerns the accessibility of field courses and resources for undergraduate students. Go ahead, Adrienne.
Thank you. There is an ethnic and racial bias in the participation in field studies, which is one part of the larger diversity crisis in earth sciences. Field courses are important because they offer unique opportunities for scientific engagement, active learning, and the development of self-efficacy. Most programs require field studies for graduation, so barriers to participating in these courses can interact with other biases in major declaration, making it difficult to study the particular barriers to field studies alone. At UCSC, field studies are optional, so biases in participation theoretically are acting only at the course level. This provides an opportunity to understand the barriers that students face when choosing to enroll in field studies. I've developed a survey of current earth science students and recent alumni to identify factors that students considered when choosing whether to enroll in field courses. This survey will go live in the coming weeks. I expect to find that the loss of income due to weekend field trips, the remoteness of the field site, and unfamiliarity or lack of affordability of equipment will be identified as key factors influencing student enrollment. These results will inform curriculum development here at UCSC, and I plan to publish in a geoscience education journal.
Our next presenter is John Deca. John is from the Department of Environmental Studies, and his research looks at the use of drones and artificial intelligence in the management of forest plant diseases. John, go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction here. So let's see. Have you ever seen a drone flying overhead and wondered who was flying it and if they were collecting images and information about you? The drones are now commonly used by the public, academics, governments, and businesses, given their flexibility and low cost. However, their use raises concerns about threats to privacy and civil liberties. This is especially concerning in the policing of historically minoritized communities, where drones may lead to increased levels of surveillance. So many new education programs have emerged in colleges to train certified drone professionals. And these programs teach people how to fly and maintain drones and process the data that comes from them, but seldom is there training in issues of privacy and civil liberties. So I work with undergraduate students with diverse lived experiences in a new drone education program here at UC Santa Cruz. In addition to learning how to fly drones, we explore the use of drones through a variety of ethical lenses, and we work to develop a framework that the students can use to assess the impacts to privacy and civil liberties. So I use experiential learning activities, examination of case studies, and pre-post reflections with both the educators and students, and help students adopt best practices and norms that thoughtfully incorporate technical, safety, and ethical considerations as future drone professionals. So the inclusion of students from underserved backgrounds in this kind of program is particularly important because the lived experiences about ethical issues contributes key insight to inform equitable practices. So as a result, their participation will help strengthen the emerging aviation field with an increased awareness and empathy for the consequences and repercussions of flight operations and data use.
Thank you, John. And Barbara will help moderate this cluster, and I'm also around to help out as well. Barbara, you want to take over?
Sure. Well, our first speaker in this cluster is Lucia Alvarado Cantero, and her research involves an arts-based approach to formal and informal learning experiences of in-transit migrant children from Central America in an escuela in the borderlands in the border of Mexico and the US. Lucia?
Hi. Each one of us in this room is more than the traumatic experiences we have endured in life. And this is particularly true for migrant children. Learning is also a part of all migrant children experiences. I will conduct an ethnographic participatory arts-based project that explores the informal educational experiences of a group of in-transit migrant children from Central America in a nonprofit escuela in Tijuana, Mexico. For this, students will first engage in telling and retelling cuentos, and will design and construct the characters using multimodal resources. I will create an animation film based on these cuentos, In the following summer, the film will be screened at the escuela, and the creators will suggest changes and decide on the final version. The analysis of this investigation consists of an exploration of children's informal learning experiences during their migration journey. I hypothesize that migrant children develop a myriad of abilities throughout the route between Central America and the United States. To mention just a few, mimicking, reading artifacts along the route, establishing ephemeral communities of practice, and of course, recognizing and performing oral genres such as singing, joking, and telling stories.
By Christina Kathleen Hugo, who takes an abolitionist and community-engaged approach to teacher learning and development. Christina?
Thank you, Professor Rogoff. Preparing abolitionist teachers who act against injustice and seek freedom is imperative. Abolitionist theory provides an invaluable tool and opportunity to reimagine teacher education programs and professional development. Core principles of abolitionist thought, collective action, and societal transformation can reorient teacher learning. Collective action prioritizes community-engaged approaches and provides critical opportunities for educators to work alongside members of the local school communities. By working collectively and centering the voices of the most oppressed, teacher education programs and professional development create openings for dismantling whiteness and opportunities to better align curriculum to the school community's cultural wealth and values. Community-based approaches to teacher learning can support educators' development of culturally sustaining and abolitionist pedagogies, since teachers have opportunities to engage in authentic dialogue with the local community, and their participation expands their cultural awareness. Abolitionists seek transformation, and it is essential for teacher educators to be clear about this goal. Teacher learning and development efforts that are centered around transformation will provide opportunities for community members to imagine new possibilities. Ultimately, integrating abolitionist ideology into teacher education programs and professional development holds expansive possibilities for the preparation of emancipatory educators. My classroom was far from perfect, but my alignment with core abolitionist values enabled me to establish openings for students to be themselves. Since freedom is at the heart of the work of abolitionist educators, students should be able to shape their realities and sit fully in their humanity, all of which becomes more possible through an expansion of abolitionist-oriented teacher education programs and professional development. Thank you.
Thank you both. So we'll move to our next speaker, who is Betania Santos. And Betania's research focuses on mental health, healing justice, and politics of care. Betania?
Thank you. Today's generation of young people are having to face unprecedented and uniquely difficult conditions, such as a global pandemic, climate change, racial injustice, and political uprisings. On December 7th, 2021, U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy announced a national mental health crisis for young people. And although findings suggest that youth across all backgrounds are being affected negatively, studies reveal that mental health among youth of color, low-income communities, LGBTQ youth, and other vulnerable populations are being affected most negatively. It is now more than ever crucial to find ways to support young people of color and their emotional well-being. Social emotional learning, also known as SEL, is one of the few curriculums in place to address emotional processing for young people in schools and their everyday lives. SEL is an important, can serve as a window of opportunity to support young people of color and the complex intersections of their lives and emotional health. In this theoretical research project, I will look at SEL and seek to expand these theories through a healing justice framework. Healing justice is a holistic response and intervention that aims to bring collective practices to transform the consequences of racial oppression onto the collective bodies, hearts, and minds of those communities most harmed. A healing justice-centered approach can support young people's mental health by acknowledging the systemic barriers they face, while also offering them an opportunity to take active roles in their well-being, both for themselves and their communities. Thank you.
So the final speaker in this cluster is Mario Alberto Gomez Zamora, And Mario's research is on colonial violence and queer indigenous memory, as well as indigenous migration and queer strategies of resistance. Mario?
Thank you so much. One of the tensions indigenous communities navigate in Mexico and the United States is gender binary identification and heteronormativity. This is one of the particular phenomena Purépecha indigenous communities have faced since the Spanish colonization in Michoacán, Mexico. According to archival records analyzed by North American historian Sep Tortorici, in the 17th century, 13 indigenous Purépecha men were criminalized for sodomy in Michoacán. 5 of them were publicly tortured, and 4 were sentenced to death by Spanish institutions. My goal is to dive into the archives to help me understand the relationship between colonial violence led by civil and Catholic institutions and the current normative discourses of the Purépecha community. I will investigate in the archives the colonial mechanisms to repress indigenous genders and sexualities and the strategies of resistance queer Purépechas used in the 17th century to disrupt gender binary and heterosexuality. Also, I will conduct an ethnography to examine the complexities queer Purépechas face when they migrate to another gender binary system, such as the United States, that tends to persecute indigenous immigrants. Thank you.
It would be good to unmute first. Thank you. I will. Our first speaker is Tess Shirefly. Did I pronounce that correctly, Tess?
Close.
Your last name? Yes?
Shirefly.
Okay, thank you.
Close, yeah.
Yeah, close. Thank you. And Tessa's research focuses on gender and racial inequity in early science learning opportunities. And you can take it away, Tess. Thank you.
Thank you. So gender imbalances in science participation has been a long-standing diversity issue in science learning contexts such as science fairs. In addition to gender imbalances, there are racial ethnic inequities. For example, Latinx students are extremely underrepresented in science fair participation. These gender and racial differences in science fair participation are rooted in structural features of the science fair that better support already privileged students, such as white boys, more so than girls and students of color. So in this project, I collaborate with the Santa Cruz and Monterey County Science Fairs to study differences in the lived experiences and impacts of participating in science fairs for boys and girls from racially diverse backgrounds. I will administer 2 surveys, one before the fair and one after, asking children and their parents to share their experiences completing their science fair projects. I hypothesize that we will find parents play an essential but often structurally unsupported role in helping their children's science fair participation. And I also believe that we will find that children's interest in science and beliefs about their abilities in science will change as they participate in the science fair. Data from this project will inform policy and programming choices that take place at the county fairs in hopes to better improve the systems and structures for children and families to participate. Through a more equitable science fair, we hope to support the science learning experiences of children and families participating in future science activities, in particular those from underserved backgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next presentation. And the next presenter is Raul Meneses Imperio. And Raul is in the education department. His research focuses on issues of race, class, sexuality, and gender, specifically around how these concepts intersect in the lives of undocumented queer students of color in secondary school settings. And today he's going to present on something else that will also be very interesting. So take it away, Raul.
Thank you, Cynthia. Latinx communities have always engaged in scientific activities and thus have always been scientists. Yet, educational institutions have historically ignored the wealth of scientific knowledge that Latinx communities have, and instead have taken deficit attitudes to explain the underrepresentation of Latinx students in the STEM fields. However, asset-based approaches have begun to challenge deficit frameworks, one of which is community cultural wealth. Tara Yoso states that community cultural wealth helps to highlight the array of knowledge, skills, and abilities possessed and utilized by communities of color, and intentionally shifts the research lens away from deficit frameworks. I will apply a community cultural wealth approach in a collaborative community pilot project called Seed Food Science, set to lift off this upcoming summer. Through gardening, growing, and cooking food, this project will highlight the scientific wealth of knowledge and learning practices that Santa Cruz Latinx families engage with, and collaboration with Latinx undergraduate STEM students. Findings from this research hope to inform the restructuring of educational and learning institutions towards the goal of leveraging the scientific wealth of knowledge that Latinx students and their families bring to learning. Thank you.
The next presenter is Valeria Alonso Blanco, and Valeria is with the Department of Psychology, and her research focuses on cultural knowledge and experiences of minoritized students and their families.
Thank you. Minoritized students can engage in research and are the experts in identifying the topics that affect their communities. Thus, we collaborated with middle school students, primarily Latinx students, to explore how youth participatory action research, or YPAR, fosters belonging among students and their family members. YPAR involves collaborating with youth to conduct research on issues related to their lived experiences. The knowledge constructed using research aims to help youth resist oppression by taking action towards social justice. 8 middle school students were involved in an after-school class focusing on research, college preparation, and community building. They developed a research project on bullying at their school due to race, gender, and sexual orientation. And they'll present their findings to their school administration to create a more inclusive learning environment for students. Additionally, students completed a survey and an interview focused on their educational experiences and the community cultural wealth they possess. We also collected interviews with their family members to further understand the experiences of Latinx parents with educational systems. Our project aims to assist educators and administrators develop more inclusive learning environments and the importance of research and action for students.
Thank you. And the speaker is Melissa Macinas, Department of Psychology, and also a visiting assistant professor at Scripps College. And Melissa's research focuses on the role of cultural practices in sociocultural development.
Thank you, Cynthia. In recent decades, researchers have investigated social and emotional learning, or SEL, which is a process where we can learn to recognize and manage emotions, make decisions, and develop meaningful relationships and behave responsibly. While SEL is a significant developmental process, it is fundamentally rooted in Eurocentric ideals that do not always represent all ethnic and cultural communities. Given the homogeneous approach found in SEL frameworks, I study how diasporic Indigenous Mexicans living in the US teach and nurture SEL through their Indigenous ways of living. In my current project, I will interview parents and youth to inquire about their cultural socialization and practices that teach youth about their Indigenous forms of belonging and communalism. My protocol will specifically ask about interpersonal interactions between youth and family and how emotions are expressed and communicated, and the agency that youth feel about their social and emotional understandings. This study builds on previous research that highlights how a culturally rich learning environment led by caring adult mentors who mentor youth through intergenerational collaboration and Indigenous ways of living contribute to their development. For instance, diasporic Indigenous communities like Xochileños and Indigenous Philharmonic bands are integral in youth's emotional development and expression of affect. Jimena, a 13-year-old Xochileña, explains to us, I do enjoy getting to play in a band that's from my culture and from my pueblo. And it's like a really good feeling because you get to express that with people from your pueblo and other people who really don't understand where you're from and the pueblo and heritage from where you come from. It's amazing. These forms of social emotional learning are prominent aspects of Indigenous ways of living that are taught to younger generations. This study will expand our current understanding of SEL by including the lived experience of diasporic Indigenous Mexicans. Thank you.